Daehyun Kim checked his datapad and sighed. Another 12 cargo containers to inspect before his shift ended. He had been working at Meridian 9 space station for 3 years now, and the job never got less tedious. But someone had to make sure smugglers didn't bring illegal goods through the docking bays. The station was massive, home to thousands of beings from dozens of different alien species. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, only making first contact 20 years ago. Most aliens treated humans with polite curiosity, though some still saw them as primitives who got lucky with faster-than-light travel. Daehyun walked through Docking Bay 7, his boots echoing on the metal floor. The bay was quiet this evening. Most of the cargo ships had already been processed. Only one unmarked freighter remained, its containers stacked in neat rows waiting for inspection. He approached the first container and scanned the manifest code. Medical supplies destined for a colony world. Nothing unusual. He moved to the next one, then the next. Everything seemed normal until he reached container 17. The moment his scanner touched the container's surface, he heard something. A soft whimpering sound, barely audible over the station's ambient noise. Daehyun froze and listened carefully. There it was again. Something alive was inside that container. His heart rate quickened. Living beings in cargo containers usually meant one thing: smuggling. He immediately activated his communicator and called station security, then carefully entered his override code to unlock the container. The door hissed open. Cold air rushed out and Daehyun stepped back. When his eyes adjusted to the darkness inside, he saw them. 3 small creatures huddled together in the corner, their eyes reflecting his flashlight like tiny stars. They were cubs, clearly young, with soft fur that shimmered between blue and silver. Their ears were large and pointed, and they had small claws on their paws. Daehyun recognized them from his training materials. Valerians, a protected species that rarely left their home worlds. The cubs stared at him with terrified eyes. The smallest one was shaking. They had no food or water bowls, just a thin blanket that looked completely inadequate for the cold temperature of the cargo hold. Daehyun's chest tightened with anger. What kind of monster would stuff children into a cargo container? He slowly crouched down, making himself smaller and less threatening. "Hey there," he said softly. "It's okay. You're safe now." The cubs didn't move. They pressed closer together, unsure if this new creature was friend or enemy. Daehyun reached for his water bottle and carefully poured some water into the container's lid. He placed it on the ground and slid it toward them. The smallest cub sniffed the air. Its nose twitched. Slowly, cautiously, it crawled forward. The other 2 watched with wide eyes as their sibling approached the water. The little one lapped at it desperately, and the others quickly joined in. Daehyun heard footsteps behind him. Security had arrived. Chief Vexlar, a tall insectoid Crithian, approached with 4 other officers. His compound eyes reflected the bay's lights in multiple colors. "What have you found?" Vexlar's voice buzzed with the typical Crithian accent. "Valerian cubs," Daehyun replied without taking his eyes off the small creatures. Someone was smuggling them. Vexlar's antennae twitched in disapproval. "Seal the bay. No ships leave until we identify the smuggler." He gestured to his officers. "Retrieve the cubs and take them to quarantine holding." 2 security officers moved forward. The moment they approached the container, all 3 cubs started making distressed chirping sounds. They scrambled away from the officers and surprisingly moved closer to Daehyun. "Wait," Daehyun said, holding up his hand. "You're scaring them." "Protocol requires immediate medical examination," Vexlar stated firmly. "They must be taken to the quarantine facility." One officer reached into the container. The smallest cub let out a high-pitched cry that made Daehyun's ears ring. All 3 cubs bolted past the officer and huddled behind Daehyun's legs, their small bodies trembling. Daehyun remained very still. He could feel their little paws gripping his uniform pants. Their warm breath tickled his ankles. When another officer tried to approach from the side, the cubs pressed harder against him, treating him like a shield. "Chief, this isn't working," Daehyun said carefully. "They're already traumatized. If we force them, it could make things worse." Vexlar's mandibles clicked together in frustration. "Regulations are clear. All rescued beings must be processed through official channels immediately. We cannot allow protocol violations because the subjects are frightened, even if following protocol causes them more harm." Daehyun felt the smallest cub climb partially up his leg. its claws barely pricking through his uniform. He instinctively reached down and steadied it with his hand. The cub grabbed his finger with both paws and held on tight. More security personnel arrived, along with a medical team. The head medic, a Borvanian with gray-scaled skin, examined the cubs from a distance with his scanning device. They appear malnourished but not critically injured, the medic reported. However, their stress levels are extremely elevated. Valerian cubs are known to be exceptionally sensitive to environmental changes. Forcing contact they resist could trigger a dangerous fear response. Vexlar considered this information. His antennae drooped slightly, a sign of deep thought among his species. What do you suggest? The medic looked at Daehyun and the cubs clinging to him. The cubs have clearly bonded with this human, at least temporarily. It would be inadvisable to separate them forcefully. I recommend allowing him to accompany them to quarantine. That is highly irregular, Vexlar protested. So is finding smuggled Valerian cubs, the medic countered. This entire situation is irregular. Daehyun felt the cubs relax slightly at the calmer tone of the conversation. The middle-sized one chirped softly and rubbed its head against his ankle. He had no idea why these creatures trusted him, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let them down. Chief, Daehyun said quietly, I know this breaks protocol, but look at them. They've already been through something terrible. Let me help them get to quarantine safely. Once they're settled and checked by doctors, we can figure out the next steps. Vexlar was silent for a long moment. His officers waited for his decision. Finally, he clicked his mandibles in resignation. Very well. You are granted temporary clearance to accompany the cubs, but this authorization ends once they are safely in quarantine. Understood? Understood, Daehyun agreed. One of the officers brought a transport carrier, but the cubs refused to enter it. They only moved when Daehyun moved, staying within touching distance of him at all times. Eventually, everyone simply walked together through the corridors, with Daehyun in the center and 3 small alien cubs padding along beside him. Station inhabitants stopped and stared as the unusual group passed by. A human cargo inspector being followed by 3 rare alien cubs like ducklings following their mother. By the time they reached the quarantine facility, half the station had heard about it. Daehyun didn't know it yet, but his life had just changed forever. And so had the galaxy's understanding of what humans could do. 3 hours had passed since Daehyun found the cubs. He sat on the floor of the quarantine facility's main observation room, and the 3 little Valerians hadn't left his side. They played with his shoelaces, climbed on his shoulders, and made soft chirping sounds whenever he spoke. Dr. Mireille Park watched through the reinforced glass wall, her eyes wide with amazement. She was the station's lead xenobiologist, and in her 15 years studying alien species, she had never seen anything like this. It's impossible, she muttered to herself, then activated her communicator to speak into the room. Daehyun, can you hear me? He looked up at the observation window and nodded. The smallest cub immediately mimicked him, looking up at the window too. I need to run some scans, Dr. Park said. Non-invasive ones. Can you keep them calm? I'll try, Daehyun replied. Dr. Park entered the room with her scanning device. She moved slowly, deliberately. The cubs noticed her immediately. The largest one stepped in front of the other 2 and made a low, growling sound. It was trying to protect its siblings. It's okay, Daehyun said gently. He held out his hand to the largest cub. She's a friend. She wants to help you. The cub looked at him, then at Dr. Park, then back at him. Slowly, it stopped growling, but remained tense and watchful. Dr. Park began her scans, moving the device through the air around the cubs without touching them. Remarkable, she whispered. Their stress hormones are still elevated, but dropping steadily. In your presence, they're actually beginning to relax. Why? Daehyun asked. Why do they trust me? I'm completely alien to them. Dr. Park finished her scans and sat down carefully on the floor, maintaining a respectful distance. That's what I'm trying to understand. Valerians are notoriously cautious. Their cubs especially. In the wild, Valerian young typically won't approach anyone outside their immediate family group for months. Yet these 3 bonded with you in less than an hour. The middle-sized cub had found one of Daehyun's uniform buttons fascinating. It pawed at it gently, making small happy sounds. The smallest one had curled up against his leg and appeared to be falling asleep. Maybe they're just desperate, Daehyun suggested. After what they've been through, maybe any kindness feels safe. No, Dr. Park shook her head. They didn't react this way to Chief Vexler or the medical team. Only you. There's something specific about you, or perhaps about humans in general, that triggers their bonding instinct. Before Daehyun could respond, the door to the observation room opened. A tall, elegant alien entered. His skin was pale purple and he wore formal robes that marked him as someone important. Dr. Park stood quickly and bowed her head in respect. "Council Representative Thornack," she said. "We weren't expecting you." Thornack's large eyes focused on the scene in the quarantine room. "The entire station is talking about the human and the Valerian cubs. I came to see for myself," he paused. "It is as remarkable as the report suggested." "Representative, these cubs need time to recover," Dr. Park said firmly. "They've been traumatized." "I understand," Thornack replied. "However, I bring news from the Galactic Protection Bureau. They are demanding the cubs be transferred to their facility on Tarlaxis Prime immediately." Daehyun felt his stomach drop. "How far is that?" 3 weeks by standard transport," Thornack answered. "The cubs would travel in a sterile containment unit monitored by medical staff." "Alone?" Daehyun stood up carefully, trying not to disturb the sleeping cub against his leg. The other two immediately stood as well, alert to his tension. "The regulations are very specific," Thornack explained. "Protected species must be handled only by certified personnel during transport. No unauthorized individuals may accompany them." "I see," Daehyun said quietly. He looked down at the 3 small faces staring up at him. The largest cub sensed his distress and gently head-butted his hand, a gesture of comfort. Dr. Park stepped forward. "Representative Thornack, I must formally protest this decision. Separating these cubs from Daehyun right now could cause severe psychological harm. They've just begun to feel safe." "I sympathize," Thornack said, and he sounded genuine. "But the Protection Bureau has jurisdiction over all rescued protected species. Their protocols exist for good reasons. Tarlaxis Prime has the best facilities in the galaxy for Valerian care." "Facilities aren't what they need right now," Daehyun said, his voice firm. "They need to feel safe. They need to know someone cares about them." Thornack studied him for a long moment. "You are quite attached to them already." "They're children," Daehyun replied simply. "Someone hurt them. Someone took them from their home and stuffed them in a cold cargo container. If I can help them feel safe for a little while, that's what I'm going to do." The representative's expression softened slightly. "I will communicate your concerns to the Bureau, but I cannot make promises. The transport ship will arrive in 2 days." After Thornack left, Dr. Park sat back down on the floor. She looked exhausted. 2 days, she said. "We have 2 days to figure something out." Daehyun didn't respond. He watched the cubs play with a medical blanket, tumbling over each other in a way that was almost normal. Almost like regular children instead of traumatized refugees. The smallest one brought him the corner of the blanket, dropping it at his feet. It looked up at him expectantly, tail wagging. Despite everything, Daehyun smiled. He picked up the blanket corner and gently tugged it. The cub tugged back, making excited chirping sounds. Soon all 3 were involved in the game, pouncing and wrestling with the blanket while Daehyun held the other end. Dr. Park recorded everything on her data pad. "This is unprecedented," she murmured. "The speed of their trust, the depth of their bonding, the way they've started playing again. I've been studying Valerian psychology for years and I've never seen anything like this." "What do you think it means?" Daehyun asked, letting the cubs win the blanket tug of war. "I think," Dr. Park said slowly, "that humans might have something the rest of the galaxy doesn't, or at least something we have in greater measure." She looked at him seriously. "You weren't trained for this. You're not a xenobiologist or a child psychologist. You're a cargo inspector. Yet somehow you instinctively knew exactly how to approach them, how to make them feel safe." "I just treated them like I'd treat any scared kid." Daehyun shrugged. "Exactly," Dr. Park said. "And that might be the key. Humans evolved caring for their young, yes, but human history is full of stories about people adopting and caring for young from other species. Dogs, cats, even wild animals sometimes. You have this instinct to nurture and protect, and it apparently works across species barriers." The largest cub had climbed onto Daehyun's shoulder and was now trying to groom his hair with its tongue. It tickled and he laughed. The sound made all 3 cubs perk up, their ears swiveling toward him. "They like when you laugh," Dr. Park observed. "They associate your happiness with safety." "What am I going to do when they take them away?" Daehyun asked quietly. In 2 days, strangers will come and force them into a transport container. They'll be terrified. Dr. Park was quiet for a moment. I don't know, she admitted. But I'm going to contact everyone I can think of. Maybe someone knows a way around these regulations. That night, Daehyun was given permission to stay in the quarantine facility. He lay on a medical cot, expecting the cubs to sleep in the small den area Dr. Park had set up for them. Instead, all three climbed onto his cot, curling up against his side. The smallest one sighed contentedly and put its paw on his hand. Within minutes, all three were asleep, their breathing deep and peaceful. Daehyun stared at the ceiling, feeling their small, warm bodies against him. Somewhere out in the galaxy, someone had hurt these children, had stolen them from their families, had treated them like cargo instead of living beings. He gently stroked the soft fur of the nearest cub. "I won't let them hurt you again," he whispered. "I promise." He didn't know how he would keep that promise, but he knew he had to try. The Galactic Coalition chamber was full. Representatives from 30 different species sat in the curved rows of seats, all watching the central floor where Daehyun stood with Ambassador Ji-won. The three cubs sat at his feet, pressed against his legs, occasionally chirping softly. It had been 2 days since the discovery, 2 days of arguments, debates, and emergency meetings. The Protection Bureau had delayed the transport ship, but only barely. Today's session would decide the cubs' fate. Counselor Veshitar, a moderate voice among the coalition, called the session to order. His species, the Thorian, were known for their careful consideration and fairness. "We are here to discuss an unprecedented situation. 3 Valerian cubs, survivors of violence, who have bonded with a human in a manner that defies our previous understanding of interspecies behavior." The Protection Bureau representative stood. His name was Kolvan, and he was clearly unhappy about this entire proceeding. "The law is clear. Protected species must be cared for in certified facilities. This human has no training, no certification, and no authority to care for Valerian young. The cubs must be transferred immediately to a facility 3 weeks away," Ji-won countered, "where they will be terrified and alone. A facility staffed by experts they don't trust and don't respond to." "Feelings are not more important than proper care," Kolvan said sharply. "Proper care includes psychological welfare." Dr. Park stood to speak. She had been granted permission to present her findings. "I have documented evidence that these cubs are healing at a remarkable rate under Daehyun's care. Their stress hormones have normalized. They're eating well. They're playing. They're sleeping without nightmares. All of this in just 2 days. Any competent facility could provide the same," Kolvan argued. "Could they?" Scholar Rinthal rose from his seat. "I have studied the recordings extensively. I have compared this case to every documented instance of Valerian cub rescue in our records. None show this speed of recovery. None show this depth of trust. There is something unique happening here." One of the Valerian representatives requested permission to speak. Her name was Kalara, and she was an elder from one of the surviving colonies. She had traveled a great distance to attend this session. "I speak for the Valerian people." Kalara's voice was soft but firm. "These cubs are our children. We have lost so many. The attack on the colony ship took nearly 200 lives, including many young ones. These 3 survived against all odds." She looked at Daehyun. "I came here expecting to demand their return to our people. To accuse this human of overstepping his place." She paused, her large eyes glistening. "But I have watched the recordings. I have seen how they trust him, how they seek comfort from him, how he treats them with the gentleness and respect our own people would show." She turned to address the council. "I have also learned something that changes everything. The cubs were taken from the ship before the final attack. They were in the cargo hold when it happened. They heard their parents die." The chamber fell silent. Even Kolvan looked uncomfortable. "Cubs who survive such trauma rarely recover," Kalara continued. "They often refuse food. They stop responding to others. Some simply give up living. Yet these 3 are playing. They are healing. Because of this human." She looked directly at Kolvan. "Who are we to take that away from them?" Kolvan stood again. "I understand the emotional appeal of this situation. But emotion cannot override law. We have protocols for good reasons. If we ignore them now, what precedent does that set?" "The precedent," said a new voice, "that life matters more than paperwork." Everyone turned. Captain Hyunwoo Choi had entered the chamber. He commanded the human vessel Persistence, which was currently docked at the station. He wasn't supposed to be here, but his presence commanded attention. "Captain Choi," Veshitar said carefully, "this is a closed council session. Forgive the intrusion," Hyunwoo bowed respectfully, "but I have information relevant to this discussion. I served on the rescue team that responded to the colony ship attack. I saw what those raiders did. I helped pull bodies from the wreckage." His voice hardened. "Those cubs survived hell, and now you want to put them through more trauma because of regulations?" "Captain, we all sympathize," Kulvan began. "Do you?" Hyunwoo challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you care more about following rules than protecting children." "That is unfair." Kulvan's scales flushed with anger. "Is it?" Hyunwoo gestured toward Daehyun and the cubs. "That man down there isn't doing this for glory or recognition. He's doing it because it's right. Because those cubs needed someone, and he answered. That's what humans do. We see someone in need and we help. Even if it's inconvenient. Even if it breaks the rules." One of the cubs, the middle-sized one, chirped loudly as if agreeing. Several council members made sounds of amusement despite the tension. Veshitar raised his hand for order. "The question before us is clear. Do we enforce existing protocol, or do we acknowledge that this situation requires flexibility?" He looked at Daehyun. "Young human, you have requested permission to foster these cubs during their rehabilitation. Do you understand what that entails?" Daehyun nodded. "Yes, counselor. I would need to resign my position and relocate to an approved facility. I would be under constant supervision. I would need to complete training in Valerian culture and biology. I understand it could take months or years. And you're willing to do this?" "Yes," Daehyun said without hesitation. "Why?" Veshtar asked. "You barely know these cubs. You owe them nothing." Daehyun looked down at the three small faces staring up at him. The largest one had its paw on his foot. The smallest one was half hidden behind his leg. The middle one was watching the entire chamber with wide, curious eyes. "Because they trust me," Daehyun said simply. "And trust is a precious thing, especially for someone who's already lost everything. They gave me their trust when they had no reason to trust anyone. I can't betray that. I won't." The smallest cub chose that moment to chirp and tug on his pants leg. It wanted to be picked up. Daehyun bent down and gently lifted it. The cub immediately curled against his chest, content and safe. "That," Kalara said quietly, "is exactly what I mean." He didn't ask permission. He didn't hesitate. He simply responded to a child's need. That is what they require right now. The council debated for hours. Arguments flew back and forth. Legal precedents were cited. Experts gave testimony. Through it all, Daehyun stood quietly with the cubs, occasionally playing with them when they got restless, keeping them calm in the chaotic environment. Finally, Veshtar called for a vote. The decision would require a 2/3 majority to override standard protocol. The vote was close. Many representatives were uncomfortable breaking established rules. But in the end, the majority sided with the cubs' welfare over bureaucratic procedure. "The council has decided," Veshitar announced, "to approve a trial fostering arrangement. Daehyun Kim will be granted temporary custody of the Valerian cubs for a period of 3 months, during which time their progress will be carefully monitored. If the arrangement proves beneficial, it will be extended. If not, standard protocols will resume." Daehyun felt his knees weaken with relief. Jiwon squeezed his shoulder. The cubs, sensing his happiness, chirped excitedly and climbed all over him. "However," Veshtar continued, "there are conditions. You will relocate to the Meridian 9 educational facility, where you will have access to both living space and research resources. Dr. Park will supervise the arrangement and provide regular reports. Scholar Rinthal will conduct ongoing behavioral studies. You will attend daily training sessions on Valerian culture and biology, and representatives from the Valerian community will have unrestricted visitation rights." "I accept all conditions," Daehyun said immediately. Kalara approached him as the chamber emptied. She looked at the cubs for a long moment, her expression complex. "They are precious to us," she said quietly. "Every Valerian life is precious, especially now that we are so few." "I know," Daehyun replied. "I promise I'll take care of them. I'll teach them about their culture. I'll help them remember who they are. Will you?" Kalara's gaze was sharp. "Or will you raise them to be human?" It was a fair question. Daehyun met her eyes steadily. "I'll raise them to be Valerian, but right now they need to feel safe. Once they have that foundation, we can build everything else." Kalara studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I believe you. The cubs have chosen well. She reached out and gently touched the largest cub's head. It leaned into her touch, recognizing something familiar. I will visit often. I will teach them our songs, our stories. But you, she looked at Daehyun, you will be the one they turn to when they're scared. You will be the foundation they build their healing upon. I won't let them down, Daehyun promised. That night in his new quarters at the educational facility, Daehyun sat on the floor with the cubs. They were exhausted from the long day, but happy. Safe. The smallest one was already asleep in his lap. The other two were fighting to stay awake, wanting to play just a bit longer. We're going to be okay, Daehyun whispered to them. All of us together. We're going to be okay. The cubs chirped softly in agreement, and for the first time since the colony ship attack, they weren't just surviving. They were beginning to heal. 3 months passed quickly. Daehyun's life had changed completely, but he didn't regret a single moment. His days were filled with caring for 3 energetic Valerian cubs who grew more confident with each passing week. The cubs now had names chosen by the Valerian community. The largest was Kaya, brave and protective of her siblings. The middle one was Tor, curious about everything and always getting into mischief. The smallest was Lena, gentle and affectionate, who still preferred sleeping curled against Daehyun every night. The educational facility had become their home. Daehyun's quarters were filled with toys, climbing structures, and learning materials. Every day, Kalara or another Valerian elder would visit to teach the cubs about their culture. They learned Valerian songs, heard stories of their people's history, and practiced traditional games. Dr. Park continued her research, amazed by what she was documenting. The cubs were thriving in ways that seemed impossible for trauma survivors. They played, laughed, learned, and slowly became whole again. Look at this, Dr. Park showed Daehyun her latest data. Their social development is accelerating. 3 months ago, they only trusted you. Now they interact confidently with dozens of different species. It was true. Kaya had become friends with a young Krithian who visited the facility. Tor loved playing with the station's maintenance robots. Even shy Lena had started approaching others, though she always checked to make sure Daehyun was nearby first. They're learning that the galaxy can be safe, Dr. Park continued, because you taught them that first lesson. You were their foundation, and now they're building confidence on top of it. Scholar Rinthal published his findings about human-Valerian bonding, causing waves throughout the scientific community. His research proposed something revolutionary. Humans might have an unusual capacity for cross-species nurturing that could be valuable throughout the galaxy. Not everyone was happy about this. Some species saw it as human arrogance. Others worried about cultural contamination. But the cubs themselves were the best argument. They were living proof that sometimes breaking the rules led to better outcomes. On the 3-month anniversary of the fostering arrangement, something unexpected happened. A small human transport ship arrived at the station carrying a family of colonists. Among them was an 8-year-old girl named Subin Nam. Subin had heard about the famous cubs and begged her parents to let her meet them. After careful discussion with Daehyun and Dr. Park, a supervised meeting was arranged. Subin sat nervously on the floor of the playroom, her parents watching from the observation area. Daehyun sat nearby with the cubs, who were curious about this small human. They're so pretty, Subin whispered, her eyes wide. They're also a little shy, Daehyun said gently. Let them come to you. Kaya approached first, always the brave one. She sniffed Subin's hand carefully. The little girl held very still, barely breathing. Then Kaya made a decision. She bumped her head against Subin's palm, asking for pets. Subin giggled with delight and gently stroked Kaya's soft fur. She likes me. Tor and Lena watched their sister. If Kaya said this new creature was safe, then it must be true. They approached together, and soon all 3 cubs were investigating Subin with great interest. Can I play with them? Subin asked. If they want to play with you, Daehyun replied. Tor found a ball and dropped it at Subin's feet, tail wagging expectantly. The girl threw it, and Tor chased after it with excited chirps. Lena joined in, and soon all 3 cubs were running around with Subin, playing a chaotic game that seemed to have no rules except having fun. Dr. Park watched with tears in her eyes. Do you see what's happening? She asked Scholar Rinthal, who stood beside her. The cubs are generalizing their trust, Rinthal observed. They learned from Dae-hyun that humans are safe. Now they're applying that lesson to other humans. This is remarkable social development. It's more than that, Dr. Park said. Look at how natural it is. Subin isn't trained in xenobiology. She's just a child playing with other children. But she instinctively knows how to interact with them. The gentleness, the patience, the joy in their play. It's the same quality Dae-hyun has. After an hour of play, the cubs were tired. They returned to Dae-hyun, seeking familiar comfort. But when Subin's parents came to collect her, Lena approached the little girl and gently head-butted her leg in farewell. Subin carefully pet her one more time. "Thank you for playing with me," Subin said seriously. "You're the best cubs in the whole galaxy." The cubs chirped happily, and Subin left with a huge smile on her face. That evening, Elder Kalara requested a private meeting with Dae-hyun. She arrived with several other Valerian representatives, and Dae-hyun felt nervous. "This was clearly important. Please sit," Kalara said gently. "We have much to discuss." Dae-hyun sat with the cubs nearby, playing with their toys but keeping one ear on the conversation as children do. "We have been watching carefully," Kalara began. "Every day for 3 months we have observed how you care for our children, how you teach them about their heritage while giving them space to grow, how you protect them without smothering them." "I've tried my best," Dae-hyun said. "You have done more than try. You have succeeded." Kalara glanced at her fellow representatives, who nodded in agreement. "The cubs are healing. They laugh, they play, they learn. They remember their parents without being destroyed by that memory. They're remarkable kids," Dae-hyun said softly. "They are, and they are ready for the next step." Kalara's expression was complex. "We want them to return to the Valerian colony, to be with their own people, to grow up knowing their culture fully." Dae-hyun's heart clenched, but he nodded. He had always known this day would come. "When?" 6 months from now," Kalara said. "We want to do this slowly, carefully. We will increase the time they spend with our people gradually. We will build connections between them and our colony. By the time they make the transition, it will feel natural, not forced." "That's good," Dae-hyun managed to say. "That's the right thing to do." Kalara studied him. "You are hurting." "Of course I am," Dae-hyun admitted. "I love them. But this isn't about what I want. It's about what's best for them." "Yes," Kalara said, "and that is why we trust you, because you understand that truth." She leaned forward. "But there is something else we must discuss, something unprecedented." She gestured to one of her companions, who produced a datapad. "We have been contacted by other species, survivors of conflicts, disasters, tragedies. They have young ones who are traumatized, lost, unable to heal in traditional care facilities. They have seen what is asking for human help," Dr. Park clarified. She had joined the meeting quietly. "Yes," Kalara confirmed. "They want to know if what happened with our cubs can be replicated. If human caregivers could help other traumatized young from different species." Dae-hyun stared at them. "You want to create a program?" "We want to propose one to the Galactic Coalition," Kalara said. "An interspecies rehabilitation program. Traumatized young would be matched with trained human caregivers during their recovery period. The goal would always be to return them to their own people once they're ready. But the healing process would involve the unique nurturing capacity that humans seem to possess. It would be carefully structured," Dr. Park added. "Extensive training for the humans. Close monitoring, always with respect for the young one's original culture. Never attempting to replace their heritage, only providing a safe space for them to heal." "And you want me to help set this up?" Dae-hyun asked. "We want you to be part of the first pilot program," Kalara said. "After Kaya, Tor, and Lena return to us, there are others who need what you can provide. If you're willing." Dae-hyun looked at the 3 cubs playing nearby. Kaya was teaching Tor and Lena a game that Kalara had taught her last week, a traditional Valerian children's game. They were learning who they were. They were healing. And soon they would be ready to go home. "Will I be able to visit them?" he asked quietly. "After they go to the colony?" "Of course," Kalara said warmly. "They are your cubs too, in a way. That bond will not disappear simply because they live elsewhere. We would welcome your visits, then yes," Dae-hyun said. "I'll help with the program. If I can do for others what I've done for these 3, then that's what I should do." 6 months later, the day of departure arrived. The Valerian transport ship waited at the docking bay. Kayator and Lena had grown so much. They were confident now, healthy, and ready for their next adventure. They had spent increasing amounts of time with the Valerian colony members. They knew the other cubs who would be their friends. They knew the adults who would care for them. The transition had been gradual and gentle, just as Kalara had promised, but saying goodbye was still hard. "You're going to do great things," Daehyun told them, kneeling down to their level one last time. "You're brave, smart, and kind. Your people are lucky to have you." Kaya rubbed her head against his hand. Tor climbed onto his shoulder one last time. Lena pressed close, purring softly. "I'll visit," Daehyun promised. "And you can call me anytime. If you're scared or sad or just want to talk, I'll always be here for you," Kalara approached. "It's time," she said gently. The cubs looked at Daehyun, then at Kalara, then back at Daehyun. They understood. This wasn't abandonment. This was the next step. They were ready. They walked to the transport ship with Kalara looking back only Ambassador Ji-won Lee arrived at Meridian 9 Station 18 hours after the cubs were discovered. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and the kind of presence that made people pay attention when she spoke. As humanity's representative to the Galactic Coalition, she had dealt with hundreds of complicated situations. But this one was different. She stood in the observation room watching Daehyun sit cross-legged on the floor while the 3 cubs climbed all over him. One sat on his head like a furry hat. Another was trying to fit itself into his uniform pocket. The third was showing him a small toy that Dr. Park had provided, chirping excitedly as if explaining something very important. "How long has this been going on?" Ji-won asked. "Nearly 20 hours now," Dr. Park replied. She looked tired. They haven't left his side except when he uses the bathroom, and even then they wait right outside the door crying until he comes back. "And the Protection Bureau still wants to take them?" "Their transport arrives in 6 hours," Dr. Park confirmed. "They've refused every appeal I've made." Ji-won watched Daehyun carefully extract the cub from his pocket and set it gently on the floor, only for it to immediately try climbing back in. He was patient, gentle, and completely natural with them. Most people would be nervous or uncertain around alien creatures, but he treated them exactly like children. "I need to speak with him," Ji-won said. When the ambassador entered the quarantine room, the cubs immediately became alert. The largest one positioned itself between Ji-won and Daehyun, growling softly. But Daehyun placed his hand on its head and said something quiet. The cub relaxed but kept watching Ji-won carefully. "Ambassador." Daehyun stood and bowed respectfully. "Please sit," Ji-won said, settling onto the floor herself. It was the best way to appear non-threatening. "I understand you've become quite attached to our small friends here." "They needed help," Daehyun said simply. The smallest cub immediately claimed his lap as soon as he sat down. Ji-won studied him. "I've read the reports. What you've accomplished here is remarkable. Valerians normally take months to trust anyone outside their family. You managed it in hours. Do you know why?" "Dr. Park has some theories," Daehyun replied. "I'd like to hear yours." Daehyun looked down at the cub in his lap, gently scratching behind its ears. "I think they were scared and alone. When you're that frightened, you don't need someone who knows all the rules. You just need someone who cares, someone who makes you feel safe. And you made them feel safe." "I tried to treat them the way I'd want someone to treat a lost child," he said. "With patience, with kindness, without expectations," Ji-won nodded slowly. "The Protection Bureau is coming. You understand you can't go with them." "I know." His voice was flat. "How do you think they'll react when they're forced to leave you?" Daehyun's jaw tightened. "Badly, they'll be terrified. They'll think they're being abandoned again." Before Ji-won could respond, another visitor arrived. Scholar Rinthal was a Cerealian, with pale blue skin and 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on his elongated face. He was one of the galaxy's leading experts on interspecies psychology. "Ambassador Lee," Rinthal bowed. "Thank you for allowing me to observe. This situation is extraordinary." "Scholar Rinthal has been studying the recordings," Dr. Park explained. "He has a theory about why the cubs bonded so quickly with Daehyun." "Indeed." Rinthal approached slowly, and the cubs watched him but didn't react with fear. Daehyun's calm presence seemed to reassure them. "I have examined the behavioral data extensively. What we are witnessing is not random. It is the result of a very specific combination of factors." "What factors?" Daehyun asked. Rinthal settled onto a chair, his long limbs folding elegantly. "Valerians are highly selective social creatures. They have evolved to recognize specific behavioral patterns that indicate safety and nurturing capability. These patterns are complex, involving body language, vocal tone, pheromonal signatures, and something we might call emotional resonance. And humans have these patterns? Jiwan asked. Humans, Rinthal said slowly, appear to have them in remarkable abundance. Your species evolved with an unusual drive to care for vulnerable young, even those not genetically related to you. This is rare in the galaxy. Most species care deeply for their own offspring but show limited interest in others. He gestured toward Daehyun and the cubs. But humans domesticated other species on your world. You took in orphaned animals and raised them. Your literature is full of stories about adoption, fostering, protecting the weak. This behavioral pattern is deeply embedded in your psychology. So the cubs recognized him as a caregiver? Dr. Park asked. More than that, Rinthal replied. They recognized him as a safe caregiver. Observe his interactions. He never forces contact. He allows them to approach at their own pace. He reads their emotional states and responds appropriately. He provides comfort without demanding anything in return. These are exactly the behaviors that trigger Valerian bonding instincts. The middle-sized cub had found Daehyun's hand and was pressing its head against his palm, clearly asking for attention. He obliged, scratching the spots that made it purr contentedly. The question, Jiwan said, is what we do with this information. The Protection Bureau won't care about theories. They have regulations. Then perhaps, Rinthal suggested, we should demonstrate the problem in a way they cannot ignore. 2 hours later, a room full of officials watched through the observation glass. Representatives from the Protection Bureau, the Galactic Coalition, and several other organizations. Dr. Park had set up a carefully controlled experiment. Daehyun sat in the center of the room with the cubs. Various alien personnel would approach one at a time, attempting to interact with the cubs while Daehyun remained present but passive. First came a Borvanian child specialist. The cubs watched him approach but showed no interest. They stayed close to Daehyun, then a Krithian medical expert. The cubs moved behind Daehyun, using him as a shield. A Cerealian caregiver tried next, speaking in soft Valerian phonemes. The cubs looked curious but wouldn't approach. Finally, Dr. Park tried. She had been around the cubs for nearly a full day by now, and they knew her scent. The smallest cub took a few steps toward her, then looked back at Daehyun as if asking permission. He smiled and nodded. The cub approached Dr. Park cautiously and allowed her to touch it briefly before scampering back to Daehyun's side. You see, Dr. Park announced to the observers. They show some tolerance for others when Daehyun is present and calm. But watch what happens when he leaves. Daehyun stood and walked toward the exit. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. All 3 cubs cried out a high-pitched distress call that made several observers flinch. They scrambled after him, running as fast as their small legs could carry them. When Daehyun stopped and turned around, they crashed into his legs and climbed up his body, desperate to reach him. The smallest one was shaking. The largest one made desperate whimpering sounds. This, Dr. Park said firmly, is what will happen if you force them onto a transport ship without him. They are psychologically dependent on him for their sense of safety. Removing him now could cause severe trauma. One of the Protection Bureau representatives, a stern-looking Borvanian, spoke up. The regulations exist for good reasons. We cannot simply ignore them because the subjects form an emotional attachment, even if that attachment is keeping them alive. G1 challenged. These cubs were starving and traumatized when we found them. In less than a day with Daehyun, they've started eating, playing, and sleeping peacefully. That's not just attachment, that's healing. The Bureau facilities have expert staff, the representative insisted. Expert staff who aren't human, Rinthal interjected. As I have explained, there appears to be something specifically about human behavioral patterns that the cubs respond to. You can have all the expertise in the galaxy, but if the cubs don't feel safe, they won't heal. The debate continued for hours. Daehyun was allowed to take the cubs back to his quarters under guard. He sat beside his door. People argued about their future. Late that night, Jiwon entered his quarters quietly. The cubs were asleep, making small snuffling sounds. Daehyun was awake, staring at nothing. I found something, Jiwon said softly, in the smuggler's data files. These cubs weren't random captures. Daehyun looked at her sharply. What do you mean? They were taken from a colony ship that was attacked 6 weeks ago. A Valerian vessel traveling to a new settlement world. The ship was raided and most of the colonists were killed. Ji-won's voice was heavy. These three are survivors. Their families are dead. Dae-hyun looked down at the sleeping cubs. Orphans. They were orphans who had watched their world destroyed. No wonder they clung to the first source of safety they found. There's more, Ji-won continued. There's an old provision in protection law. Very old, almost never used. It allows for fostering our volunteers to care for rescued young during their rehabilitation period. And if experts agree it's in the young one's best interest, it can be approved. You want me to foster them? Dae-hyun asked quietly. I want to give you the option, Ji-won said. It would mean giving up your job here, relocating to an approved facility, constant monitoring. It's not easy. Dae-hyun didn't hesitate. I'll do it. Think about it first. This could take months, maybe years. I don't need to think about it.